Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining today. My name is Catherine, and I lead communications for Environmental Defence Fund's Global Clean Air work in the UK. Our Global Clean Air initiative uses air quality data to build the case for policies that reduce pollution and improve people's health. So why we're here today, technology is allowing us to gather, analyze, and visualize unprecedented amounts of pollution data. And today we're going to talk to you about an effort to map London's air pollution sources on a hyperlocal level. And this map allows people to zoom in on a neighborhood and see how much different activities are contributing to pollution at that location, or zoom out and see what the main sources are across the city. There'll be more on that later. So of course, this is Climate Week. So why are we talking about air pollution during Climate Week? Well, I'm sure as many of you know, a lot of the sources of emissions that warm our planet and the sources of local air pollution are one and the same. So for example, commercial and domestic heat and power, road transport, aviation, shipping, industrial emissions, and more are all key sources that can be tackled together to reduce greenhouse gas emissions as well as health-harming air pollution. Yet climate and air quality goals are often treated separately within a city or region, creating an artificial division and disconnected solutions. A city might have a climate plan and a distinct air pollution plan run by different teams, which can inadvertently lead to harmful health outcomes. We believe it's essential to have integrated climate and clean air solutions, and that detailed data can help cities target the best opportunities for the biggest pollution reductions. So today we will hear from Amy Stidworthy from Cambridge Environmental Research Consultants, as well as Elizabeth Fonseca from Environmental Defence Fund. So a few housekeeping matters before we go further. This event is being recorded. And if you have any questions, please put them into the Q&A box. So I'll be keeping an eye on those, and we'll get to the questions portion at around the half-hour mark. So unless you note that you want to be named, I'll read any questions as anonymous. Depending on how many questions there are, we may not use the full hour. I'll also be putting relevant links in the chat box. So I'd now like to introduce our first speaker. So Amy Stidworthy from CERC is here to say a few words about the modeling they undertook to produce a detailed data set of air pollution sources in London.
Thank you, Catherine. I'll just share my screen. You can all see that okay. Yes, thank you, Catherine. Yes, so my name's Amy Stidworthy and I'm a principal consultant at CERC in the UK. In the Breathe London pilot project, we carried out detailed dispersion modelling of air pollution in London using our ADMS-Urban model to produce the highly detailed pollution maps that Elizabeth is going to demonstrate to you today. I'm just going to give you a brief overview of how we carried out the modelling, and then you can find all the detail in the final modelling report that accompanies the Breathe London blueprint, which is also available on the Global Clean Air website, and I'll give you the link for this at the end. ADMS-Urban doesn't need a great deal of introduction. It's well known in the air quality community, and it's used in cities all over the world by a whole range of public sector, private sector and research organisations. ADMS-Urban is a dispersion model, so it's driven by information about the sources of air pollution emissions in a city, the weather, and by the urban morphology, and it applies the science of air pollution dispersion and atmospheric chemistry to predict the concentration of pollutants that are harmful to our health in the air that we breathe. Dispersion modelling is a four-step process. First of all, you must collect the model input data for the city, which is primarily pollution source data, weather data, and information about the urban environment, street canyons, and so on. For the pollution sources, this means compiling an emissions inventory containing the locations and characteristics of the sources, their pollutant emission rates, and how they change during the day. Often the most challenging and time-consuming part of this data gathering exercise is the compilation of the emissions inventory, but the more detailed the emissions data, the greater the richness in the model data set. In London, we were fortunate to have the London Atmospheric Emissions Inventory, which is published by the Mayor of London and Transport for London. At CERC, we are also developing tools that use inversion techniques to combine modeled and measured data to derive emissions data where these are lacking or in need of improvement. The next two steps in dispersion modelling are iterative. First, we apply the model to calculate concentrations at measurement locations and compared the measured and modelled results. And then we refined the model setup to improve the model agreement with measured data. We kept repeating those two steps until we were confident the model was accurate. In Breathe London, this is where the static sensor data and the hyperlocal measurements collected during the project were vital. And we also used the data available from the existing measurement networks in London. Refining the model means looking at all aspects of the modelling. Do we have the right emissions data? Are the locations of the monitoring site receptors in the correct location in relation to the road? Are they at the right height? Are they correctly inside or outside of a street canyon? Do we have a good estimate of the background levels of air pollution? In Breathe London, this model verification process highlighted a few issues in the emissions inventory where particular roads or junctions were missing or had unexpectedly low traffic flows. Anyway, once we were sure that the model was giving good, accurate predictions, then the final step was to apply the dispersion model to understand more deeply the causes of air pollution in London. Dispersion models are able to predict pollution concentrations everywhere, all of the time. And these maps show modelled annual average carbon dioxide and PM2.5 for 2019 at 10-metre resolution across Greater London. In Breathe London, we focused primarily on toxic pollutants, but the project did also produce output for CO2. This level of detailed output allows problem areas to be identified and targeted for pollution reduction measures. Also, data like this is increasingly being used in health studies to look at correlations with rates of ill health, mortality, sometimes in conjunction with other data on socioeconomic factors such as deprivation. To effectively target action to reduce air pollution, we have to look at where the pollution is coming from. And source apportionment modelling can help with this. To produce the source apportionment maps Elizabeth is about to demonstrate to you, we looked separately at annual average concentrations of NOx and PM2.5 across the city caused by sources in 24 different categories for NOx and 27 different categories of PM2.5. As I said before, you can find all the detail about the modelling methodology, including the verification results, in the final modelling report at this link. For more information, you can email me at this address. And now I'm going to hand back to Elizabeth to demonstrate the maps themselves.
Great, thank you, Amy. Hello, everyone. We're excited to have been able to develop a platform to showcase the modeled source apportionment data sets that CERC produced as part of the Breathe London pilot project. We hope that this new interactive map will be useful to a wide range of groups, including local authorities, policymakers, researchers, community campaigners, other NGOs, and really anyone interested in understanding and addressing the sources of air pollution. So let's begin. I'll share my screen. Hopefully you all can see this. Great. So the map is available on the Environmental Defense Fund's Global Clean Air website at globalcleanair.org. You can find it on the menu under Solutions and Resources, and then London Pollution Sources Map. Misclicked there. There we go. So you'll be greeted by this pop-up. We've highlighted that this is a model data set for 2019 here and on the map itself to make clear that this is not measured or current data. I'll just click on OK to close it. And here you can see the embedded map. And I'm just going to take us through the rest of the page before returning to it. So scrolling down, there's a short section on how to use the map. A section here on the map data, and then down here, a list of the different sources on the map and a description of what they are. So scrolling back up to map, I'm going to start by using the button on this top right-hand corner of the map to expand it to full screen. So here we have the map, and I'm just going to zoom in. So what you see is a map using a heat color palette to show modeled annual mean pollution concentrations of PM2.5 and NOx for 2019, based on the London emissions inventory, as Amy described. Data is provided on a 10 by 10 meter grid out to the M25 motorway running on the outskirts of London. It's actually wider. This area is wider than the established Greater London and its individual local authorities. So the map layers are provided to show the contribution from individual as well as some group sources. For example, you could see commercial and domestic gas data as separate layers or together as a combined layer. So I'm going to get us started here on the left-hand panel. So you can see at the top, you can choose either NOx or PM2.5. We're going to stay on NOx for now. You can see right now we're looking at a total. So that's a total of all the different source categories. In this case, we're talking about road transport, other transport, which includes aviation, rail, and shipping. We have commercial and domestic fuel, industrial and construction, as well as miscellaneous. So that's smaller sources, some sewage treatment work, some household level generation of pollution. So we're just going to stay on total for the moment, and I'm going to start showing you some of the functionality of the map. So I'm just going to click anywhere on the map. And what you have are these two pop-ups. This one here is telling you what the concentration of NOx, as it's what's selected here on the left-hand side, what the concentration of NOx is on that 10-meter grid that I have just selected. So although we're fairly zoomed out here, let me go back. That's not what I meant to do. Although we're fairly zoomed out here, this does go down to street level. So what we see is the concentration of NOx at the point that I've just clicked on, that 10 by 10 meter grid, and the percentage of the total NOx. Well, because we are on the total category as selected here on the left-hand side, it's reading 100%. But then you can move to this graph to see how that is broken down between the individual source categories. So we have road transport, all other transport, industrial and construction, heat and power, miscellaneous, which I went through earlier. And we also have the level of background. So that's pollution that's blowing into the city from outside of its boundaries. If you hover on any of the bars, you will also see the actual concentration attributed to that source category. So I'm going to come back over here to the left-hand side, and we're going to go through an example. But first, I'm going to take us over to PM2.5. So you can see it's still showing us data for that area selected. And it's showing us the concentration. So again, as selected here on the left-hand side, the total concentration of PM2.5 in that 10 by 10 meter grid, and how that breaks down across the different source categories as well as background. And as we're dealing with PM2.5, the majority is from background. So I'm going to close these out, and I'm going to start by taking us through an example. So I'm choosing other transport as it has much more discrete sources. And you can see here that we can choose either individual sources or group sources. So we're going to start with individual, and I'll bring us back to grouped. So in the individual sources, right now we are looking at aviation. So what this is showing is pollution associated with aviation. And you can see here, this is Heathrow Airport. And here are the, you can see the runways. And out here is City Airport, which is just to the east of the center of the city. Now, this list of color buckets is the same for each individual source given for each source category. So in this case, it is the same for aviation, commercial shipping, passenger shipping, and rail, which are the other layers in this other transport group. And that's so that they can be compared to one another. So here I'm going to move to commercial shipping. You can see the Thames River come alive there, mainly in the east of the city, heading out to sea. Here we have passenger shipping, so you see more central London and the Thames coming to light. And finally, here's rail, showing main railway lines where diesel power is still used. And finally, I'm going to move to showing you the totals, so you'll see them all pop up. So much like when looking at a total, one of the total layers earlier, looking here and clicking just between the airport and a main railway line, you can see that it's giving us the concentration. So that's the concentration that's coming from what has been selected. So that's all the total of other transport. And it's telling us what percentage that is of the total PM 2.5 pollution experienced at that 10 by 10 meter grid. And then over here, we get the actual breakdown of the different sources within that source category. So being closest, in this case, to aviation and rail, you can see they have the largest contribution. If I come over here towards city airport and towards the commercial and passenger shipping area, you can see they take precedence. And then here at Paddington Station, you can see it's mainly rail having an influence. So that is one example. I'm now going to take us back to NOx. And I'm going to take us through the other transport, the road transport category. It's our longest and largest category. So much like with other transport, you can choose individual or group sources. I'll get to the group sources in this section. So in terms of the individual sources, we've started on motorcycles, which at this scale is not highly visible, but let's move on to one that certainly is. And here we are with petrol cars. Like I showed earlier, it's the same color buckets being used for all these individual sources, so you can compare them to one another. So you can see the road network has come alive across London. And I'm now going to choose diesel cars. So you can see how much more of an impact diesel cars are having than petrol across the city. And what you see is that it loses a lot of detail, particularly around the roads. And I'm just going to zoom in to kind of give a better idea of that. And you can see there isn't a great deal of detail here. And that's because of using the same color buckets for all of the layers, because the contributions are so wide. There isn't a perfect fit for all of them. And so where we've seen that happen, and where you see an asterisk on the side of a source name, this will appear down here, this line that says change scale. So you can move from the standard comparative scale to a more detailed scale. So this way, this change in color buckets allows you to see the rise and fall of pollution as you move towards and away from each of the individual sources. I'm going to go back to standard, and I'm going to take us through just a few of the other sources as an example. So we have taxis. This is mainly black cabs. You can see the center of London is lights up more than the rest of the area. We have petrol vans, which I'm showing here, again, with little detail, and diesel vans. And then finally, you can see that we have buses. So this is buses that are part of the London public transport network. We have a layer showing buses and coaches not associated with public transport. We have rigid HGVs. So with HGVs, these are heavy vehicles. And then articulated HGVs, so larger lorries, Arctic lorries. And then total, which bringing all of them together, you can see that we've added this detailed scale so that the rises and falls can be more visible. So moving on from here, I want to go to the group sources. So with the group sources, what we've done is we have paired different individual sources that are often taken together, whether it's from a policy perspective or from just general interest. So here's a list of the different layers that have been taken together. So here we have petrol, cars, and LGVs, so petrol, cars, and vans grouped together. We've also done diesel cars and LGVs, and you can see that option for a detailed view pops up. We have all cars. And if you click on the map, you'll see that that is the combination of petrol and diesel cars. Then moving on to this one, which is diesel cars and taxis, as most taxis are diesel. Then I'll move on to the categories where it's less easily defined. So here we have all smaller vehicles. So in this case, that means motorcycles as well as diesel and petrol cars and taxis. Then another example is larger vehicles, where we've grouped together buses, HGVs, and LGVs. And then we have another example being all heavier vehicles. So this is buses, HGVs, and then finally, all diesel vehicles, which again benefits from having a more detailed option. So I will leave it here in terms of the different maps. And please, after this presentation, I hope you visit the site and have a look around yourselves. I'm now going to move into showing some of the other information that's available. So here on the left-hand side, you'll see selections of vulnerable populations. So these are different policy relevant, health relevant populations. So we've put together a list of all the schools in London. It doesn't go all the way out to the edge because there's a difference between the edge of London and the edge of the motorway modeled. And if you hover over any of these, you will see the name of the school. If you then click, you will get the data for whatever is selected here on the left-hand side. And it should be noted that the data is for that 10-meter grid, not for the school as a whole. So you'd want to zoom in and have a look at, depending on how large the school is, whether pollution varies significantly across the school, particularly where it's near main sources like busy roads. I'll just close that. then we have hospitals. So I'm going to turn that layer on, which similarly you can hover over, click to get the data from the 10 by 10 meter grids. And then we have a list here of boundaries. So this first one, the ultra low emission zone, it is the same as London's congestion charging zone. So this is an area where all vehicles need to meet a certain emission standard to be able to enter, or else pay a fee. That is about to be expanded out to a larger area in London in October of this year, and you can see that area highlighted. And then we have the London low emission zone, which is an area where all heavier vehicles must meet the same standards that are applied here in central London, else pay a fee. So finally, we have the administrative boundaries. So these are the outlines of the different local authorities within London that make up London, the 33 boroughs and councils. So if you hover over each of them, you're provided with the name of that individual authority. So that's it here for the left-hand side. Coming over to the right-hand side, we've already used this top button up here on the right, but here there's a location viewer. So you use this as any sort of Google location searcher. You can type in a road, you can type in an area, you can type in a postcode. So I'm just going to go to this example. So the Marylebone area of London. So what happens is the map will zoom in to whatever you've selected, and the pop-ups will appear for whatever is selected here on the left-hand side. So in this case, we're looking at road transport, all diesel vehicles, and I'll move to the detailed view so that it looks more engaging. So what it's showing here is the 10 by 10 meter grid somewhere in the center of the area, the chosen center of the area that I have searched for the location of. And this would be the same if you're searching for a road or a postcode. The data that comes up isn't the average across the entire area, it is for that 10 by 10 meter grid. The next button, I'm just going to zoom out to greater London view. Again, so this next button here is a location finder. So if you are in London and you are interested to see what the pollution is at your location, you can use our location finder. So it will pan you over to wherever you are in London. Turn that off. And then here, finally, we have some frequently asked questions. So if you're interested in why the color scales change, why we use model data, why NOx and PM 2.5, and finally, why we're using annual averages, you can come here. So before I move on from the map, I want to, or before I close, so I'm just going to go here to minimize it back to an embedded map. You see this link here on the left-hand side to see the monitoring data map. So if you click there, it will bring you to a map displaying the monitored data. So this is showing the average data measured by the lower cost monitors used as part of the Breathe London pilot project. So by clicking on any of these dots, you will get the data from those individual monitor sites. And also, we undertook mobile measurements using reference grade monitors on Google Street View vehicles that were driven across the city. And what you have here is street by street information provided on 30-meter road segments of annual air pollution. So here on the left-hand side, you can see that the information provided is for NO2 and PM 2.5. So I will leave it there, and I will hand back to Catherine to address any questions you may have. And I'll leave this map up so that we can look around if your questions are relevant to it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Yeah, I think we have one question about how this map might be used in a policy setting.
Great, yes. So we anticipate, and we've produced these maps in collaboration with other NGOs and policymakers. And we anticipate that these sorts of maps are able to demonstrate to the relevant players, whether we are looking on a London-wide basis, what the main culprits are, what the main pollution sources are, so that policies can be targeted. They can be used as awareness raising tools as well for policymakers that are looking to implement perhaps unpopular policies. And it can also be used on a very localized scale. If local communities and activists are concerned about pollution in their local area, they can come in and have a better understanding of what the pollution sources are in their area so that they can push for change.
Thank you. And then another question, and perhaps this might be best for Amy, but just in terms of whether this is possible in other cities and what about London made this type of data available?
So the first question is, in answer to your first question, yes, it's certainly possible in other cities. So the ADMS-Urban model can be applied anywhere and has been applied in many cities across the world. this kind of study where we're looking at detail, air pollution in this level of detail, and going down to this level of detail in the source apportionment and the number of categories that we've looked at. London is quite advanced in having a very detailed emissions inventory in the London Atmospheric Emissions Inventory, and that's for a number of historical reasons. But so the situation in London is fortunate for this kind of work, that we do have very detailed emissions which are maintained and updated by the local authority, the Mayor of London and the Greater London Authority regularly. So in other parts of the world, the level of detail that you might be able to go into might not be quite so great. The number of categories you might be able to look at might not be quite so great. But if there are emissions, then this kind of approach can be applied anywhere.
Great, thank you. And we've got one more question about the cost of the Breathe London pilot project. So if we can give some information about the cost of that.
The Breathe London project as a whole, I couldn't say. It's a difficult one to estimate because it was not only across a number of years with different funders, but also a lot of the partners who took part in the project, which I meant to highlight actually. So I'm just going to hop over there. More, you can find more information here on our website as to what it comprised, but here are the project partners and funders listed. So a lot of time was given in kind by the different partners to develop the science, because we were not only looking to put the monitors in place, but also to measure, to also study how well lower cost monitors worked. And it was a perfect setting to do so in London, where we have a very robust reference monitoring network that a lower cost monitoring network could be tested against, as well as the mobile monitoring that was undertaken. So it was a multifaceted project, including all of that work, its mapping, the studies. We produced a blueprint for global cities, and then of course these maps. Sorry, I can't be more specific.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So that is all for our questions. Amy, Elizabeth, is there anything else that you want to share or add?
No, that's good.
Okay, and I've put in the chat the link to both the CERC report from the Breathe London Blueprint and the direct link to the map itself. So thank you for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks. Goodbye.